Back with you tonight, John in Focus, and thanks for staying on. Government says South Africa is committed to contributing its fair share to the global climate change effort as part of the Paris Agreement, which the country is a signatory to. Now, the Presidential Climate Commission says it has a strategy to fast-track the country's transition to renewable and streamline energy policies with international climate commitments. The acting Minister of Energy, I think not so long ago, would have launched an instrument that is certainly looking at ensuring that just energy projects are prepared and they are mobilizing enough resources. We'll talk to that, but also talk a little bit about where the economic cluster is heading. We're joined now by the Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Nonceba Mhlauli. Deputy Minister, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time and for coming on this evening. Before we come to the Just Energy Transition conversation, the partners in the GNU, the Democratic Alliance, following the medium-term budget policy statement, are saying for the very first time in the history of budgets, the economic cluster is finally beginning to listen to some of their proposals. One of them being no bailouts to failing SOEs, 2 public-private partnerships, 3 prioritizing investment instead of consumption spending, and particularly not increasing the tax, citing things like e-tolls and so on and so forth. Is this the real reflection of the government of national unity, that the opposition views are now being considered in what comes out in their policy direction of the country?
Good evening, Tabo, and thank you very much for having us this evening. I think that anyone who attempts to claim that massive policy shifts and implementation thereof would happen within a space of 100 days has a very limited understanding of how government functions and what goes into governing a department. And I think that those that have made such pronouncements, and I've seen some of them for that matter, it's nothing short of extreme opportunism and a very limited understanding of the job at hand. Many of the things that you've mentioned, for that matter, are reforms that would have been in place for years. For an example, the reforms around electricity, for an example, is something that has been in the pipeline for at least the past 3 to 4 years, with the introduction of Operation Vulindlela Phase 1. And in actual fact, we are currently at a point of launching Phase 2, which the President will be launching quite soon. We're in government following the COVID-19 pandemic. Government introduced the Economic Recovery and Reconstruction Plan. And it is within the context of that ERRP that such economic reforms would have been looked at, looking at the issue of, your supply of electricity, looking at the visa issue, looking at your logistics and your rail network, looking at the issue of water licensing, looking at the issues of digital migration insofar as the spectrum is concerned. All of those reforms are reforms that were introduced in 2020 by President Ramaphosa, and it is now that we are seeing the fruits of those. And in actual fact, the last report of Operation Vulindlela stated that at the end of the 6th administration, 94% of those reforms had already been implemented. And at the time of the end of the 6th administration, there was no GNU. It was all particular reforms. So it's really just opportunism, and I think also just excitement of being the new kids on the playground. So we should really just forgive them for that.
But is it not true, though, that the economic class, and particularly taking a reflection of the MTBPS, that there is a scaling up to an extent of the private players coming into the delivery of infrastructure? It's emerging as almost it's the central component of this medium-term budget policy statement, where there's an acknowledgement that the existing infrastructure is deteriorating, backlogs are growing, and the cost of providing this infrastructure is high. For example, if you look at the independent transmission project, which we will talk to when we come to the Just Energy Transition conversation, needs a lot of private players who are going to come in with investment at that level.
Again, again, that is literally cut and paste the ERRP. It is part of the reforms that the ERRP speaks about is exactly that. How do you ensure that you bring about private investment into your energy space, precisely so that you can have stabilize the grid, but also ensure that there is energy security and greater access to energy. And those are things that didn't start on the 1st of July or the 30th of June when the announcement of the GNU were made. Those were things that were already in the pipeline, and many of them, in actual fact, already had been implemented. Of course, I think we must not discount the fact that we are currently in a GNU. And part of that means that you have 10 parties that have come together following the ANC's call to say that let's come together and let's form government. And of course, part of that arrangement of the 10 parties that have the parties would have agreed on basics, your fundamentals, which are within the document of the statement of intent. Part of that being, of course, rapid, sustainable, and inclusive economic growth, and the issues around energy security and energy and access to energy. Are captured within the importance, or rather within the pillar of ensuring that one of the priorities for this government of national unity in the 7th administration is rapid, sustainable, and inclusive growth. So those are things that we all agree with and we all agree on as partners within the GNU. But to say that these were things that were implemented within the last 100 days would be a bit adventurous, to say the least. They've been in the pipeline for quite some time. Operation Vulindlela was introduced in 2020, and the president has continuously reported on its successes in terms of introducing reforms and introducing a new way of doing things in order for government to be able to ensure that we deal with the backlogs in those particular industries, but also ensure that we bring about the much needed economic growth that we need for all.
Let's talk just energy transition investment plan in particular. The conversations around that is that, one, there is some $11.6 billion that has been pledged in support of South Africa from international partners from France, Germany, UK, US, EU. I believe Denmark is joining that group, Netherlands, Canada, Switzerland, and Spain. Recently, it was announced that only 600 million, I suppose, in grant funding, 600 million rands now in grant funding will be made available, at least at this stage. And many people are saying 11.6 billion. Why only 600 million being made available now?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I missed you there for a second.
I'm saying many are saying there was 11.6 billion in pledges to support the just energy transition in South Africa. Why only 600 million being made available as far as grant funding?
So remember, that's why we have as part of the Presidential Climate Change Commission would have set up your JET funding scheme. Precisely because of the undertaking that we would need at least in the region of a couple of billions, insofar as, and I think the correct figure there was about 98 billion that would be needed for us to ensure that we meet our decarbonization commitments in a manner that is just, and that the outcomes of those do not negatively affect the people of South Africa insofar as economic growth is concerned, insofar as energy security is concerned, and particularly insofar as employment is concerned. So that is then when the funding scheme would have been set up under the JET implementation plan. And part of that, in actual fact, on Monday, we had a discussion with the UNDP and the Open Society Foundation, where they themselves actually made a pledge insofar efforts towards the JET energy transition. Of course, as we move towards, it's obviously a long-term plan, and as we move towards COP29 in a couple of days, and the various different conversations that are going to be taking place, that funding plan is something that is currently underway, and in terms of ensuring that we do have different partners coming to the fore, and those different partners making those pledges for us to get to the point of the amount of money that we need to raise in that regard.
Now, talk to me then about the projects that we currently have on the pipeline. I mean, do we have a local component to those particular projects? Because the criticism is that what will ultimately happen is that entities and consultants from the very same countries who are providing the funding are going to be the beneficiaries, because there will not be some direct projects that are from South Africa, for example, that would come from the communities, that would cushion the workers, that would also see the ownership of those products belonging to those communities.
So I think the first important thing that would have happened in the last couple of months, insofar as South Africa is concerned, is the signing of the Climate Change Act, which essentially streamlines the work of government to ensure that we incorporate the country's emissions reduction strategy one into statute, but also that ensures that government policies are aligned for us to meet our goals, and also introducing the budget, something that we've just spoken about in the previous segment, that you then introduces the carbon budgets, placing the obligations on major emitters, and establishing your sectoral emissions targets. So that's one, and I think that's been a major development insofar as South Africa is concerned, ensuring that we do have that piece of legislation intact. Secondly, of course, the concern around that massive figure, which is approximately 98 billion rand, and how we mobilize towards that is quite important, particularly if you're looking at your provinces such as Mpumalanga, for example, which would have been a province that would have been quite reliant, as well as the municipalities, would have been quite reliant on a coal-heavy industry, which is why part of what the PCC is doing right now, and the work of the PCC insofar as the jet implementation plan is concerned, is to ensure that you do introduce a skills transfer. And what does a skills transfer seek to do? One, it seeks to reskill our existing workforce and equip them, particularly the young people within those particular areas, with the necessary skills to ensure that we have the necessary skills towards your clean energy economy. And part of that skills transfer project is not only going to be focused on provinces such as Mpumalanga, but also looking at different areas within the country. So we're going to be introducing something called skills development zones. And those skills development zones will be tailored towards ensuring that in provinces such as your Northern Cape, your Eastern Cape, and your Western Cape, you introduce or you have a skills transfer that's going to speak to the jet implementation targets of those particular areas. For example, in the Northern Cape, you have the green hydrogen projects, and part of the green hydrogen projects are a new set of skills, which is why we're going to be introducing this particular jet skills desk, which will be under the Department of Higher Education and Training. So these are just some of the priorities that the PCC as well as government have identified to ensure that as we are in the process of this just energy transition, it is one whereby we don't get to a future that is green in terms of green energy, but then you don't have the necessary skills to accompany that particular future.
Yeah. What are the industrial opportunities, especially for young people? Many people, I'm sure you'd have seen when you posted this on the handle of the department, they said, yeah, why are you having this conversation without engineers? Engineers must be a part of this. But there are young people who are engineers who are saying we're being left out in this conversation of the just energy transition. How are young people accessing particularly the industrial opportunities that are quite meaningful?
So that's an important point, right? And that's why we had the conversation to start with, because often what we do is we have these conversations about having a sustainable, a green and sustainable future. And we talk about what that future looks like. And we talk about the green economy. We talk about green hydrogen and or clean energy and all of these things that we are working towards for the future. But then often the people that are actually left behind in those conversations are the very same people who are going to be there in that future, which is your primary benefactors, which are your young people, which is why it's important. And that's why this introduction of this skills desk is a central part of the work of the Presidential Climate Commission, and is a central part of the JET implementation plan to ensure that in the different areas. So if you're going to Mpumalanga and you're looking at the work that you are doing in terms of climate change, the work that you are doing in terms of your transition, and within the JET implementation plan, rather, you are able to reskill the existing workforce within those areas. If you go to the Northern Cape, if you go to the Eastern Cape, if you go to all other areas wherein we are looking at your energy security, and looking at the implementation of the JET. Young people are taken along, young people are reskilled, but also young people become part of the conversation. Interestingly, the UNDP actually had a survey where they spoke to young people in those areas, as you correctly say. And part of the biggest concern that came out of the survey when they're speaking to young people in those areas was the young people, one, were not even aware of what the just energy transition is, how it affects them, what skills sets would be needed for the future. If you're speaking, for an example, about green hydrogen, what is that about? If you're speaking about energy security, what is that about? If you're speaking about access to energy, what is that about? And we also then found that among our young people, there's also a huge lack of, firstly, just awareness about this particular topic. And it's often a topic that we speak about among the experts only. And part of what we said actually on Monday in that conversation that we had with the United Nations Development Programme was that with government and themselves as civil society and the different organizations that were there, is that we have to embark on a public education and public awareness campaign so that we can get young people to form part of the conversation and draw in the engineers, draw in the energy experts and all of the people that we need who are young people who are going to be able to form part of the conversation about what ought to happen in terms of the just energy transition.
Yeah. We are not only responding, I suppose, as you put it, to an environmental crisis, but we are also, in South Africa, responding to an economic growth crisis. We are also responding to an employment crisis. Now, are you saying those who are already in employment will need to be heading to institutions of higher learning to be a part of these skills development zones? How exactly is it going to happen?
No, not at all. So what we've identified is there will be, one, a need to reskill the existing workforce, right? In order to equip them, particularly the youth, with the necessary skills for a clean energy economy. So that's one. But two, what we are also saying is that there needs to be a dual focus on ensuring that young people are also able to access those opportunities, as you've just correctly said. So to achieve this, the Department of Higher Education and Training will lead the establishment of the desk. And what the desk is going to be doing is that it's going to be working closely with the Human Resource Development Council and engage a broad range of stakeholders in the higher education and training sector, both within and outside of government, to ensure that you set up or you create these skills development zones, which will be tailored. So it's not going to be, we must now all go back to school. It's going to be setting up a desk where we engage within government and outside of government and creating these skills development zones that will look at what skills are required, for example, for initiatives in provinces like Mpumalanga, to develop green hydrogen initiatives in provinces such as the Northern Cape, the Eastern Cape, and the Western Cape, and so on and so forth, so that you can ensure that at the end of the day, you create the skills base. But it's not to say that you're going to be forced now to go back to school, but it's going to look at what is required and how do you introduce programs to reskill the workforce to be able to respond to a clean energy economy.
Yeah. Small firms, trade unions, municipalities, NGOs, these are people who are supposed to be really taking advantage of these. But every time, when the president announces particular programs that are aimed at benefiting SMEs and those kind of sectors, the question that comes up is the question of the eligibility criteria, and saying sometimes that eligibility criteria is set at a marker that excludes a certain portion of the communities, which again then seems to be going at odds with the goal of economic diversification, which is what the Just Energy Transition is supposed to bring about. How is the JET Project Management Office in the Presidency going to ensure that that eligibility criteria is a little bit more inclusive?
Okay, so there are three sort of work streams, right? And the three work streams look at your core sector portfolios, which is your electricity, green hydrogen, etc. The second one being your skills base, which is what we've just spoken about, and the whole issue around transition, how to ensure that you have a skills base within the transition that is able to respond to a clean green economy for the future. And then after that, you're looking at energy efficiency and so on and so forth. But to answer your question, how do we ensure that everyone does form part of the conversation? In actual fact, when we had this roundtable on Monday, on the program, you had government, which is ourselves, through the PCC, which is the Presidential Climate Commission. You had ESCOM through the chair of the board. You had an academic, which is the civil society, representing civil society. You had the labor unions represented as well. While they were on the program, you had the labor unions represented as well. And you had, I can't remember the last one. But the point is that the conversation that we had was all inclusive. But what's most important is your M&E function, which is your monitoring and evaluation and your stakeholder engagement functions, which is core to the work of the JET implementation plan. And in actual fact, within the plan itself, there is actually a portfolio that specifically looks at stakeholder engagement to ensure that everyone is taken on board in this conversation and within all of the work that is going into the implementation of the Just Energy Transition, but also ensuring that beyond the stakeholder engagements, you have monitoring and evaluation to also ensure that you are able to track the involvement of everyone, but also the implementation of your plan, which is the plan which was termed 2023 to 2027.
Right. Deputy Minister, I appreciate your time. Let's leave it there for tonight. Thank you very much for coming on. Deputy Minister in the Presidency there, Noceba Mhlauli.